Everybody all set? Hearing no dissent. Good morning. I stand before you today as the duly elected Mayor of the City of Toronto, and it is my job to stand up for the people of Toronto, all of the people of Toronto, whether they voted for me or not. And I firmly believe that one of my fundamental responsibilities is to protect the democracy which binds our society together. The bedrock of that democracy is fair process, that the people always have an opportunity to be heard by their government. And that's why when elections are meddled with, when the very rules that guide them are upset mid-campaign, people, regardless of their political stripe, are rightly angry. This is a gigantic decision about the future of Toronto. Like many of you, I read news reports last night about changes that are being proposed to the size of Toronto City Council, the largest city in the country, the fourth largest city in North America. I then spoke to Premier Ford and told him in no uncertain terms that the process around this stunning and massive change is absolutely not right. I want to be clear. I told him repeatedly during that conversation that I welcome a discussion around how our city is governed. In fact, I raised one aspect of a number of days ago in an interview on the subject of the mayor's powers. Like many people in this city, I believe we need a discussion about the role of the mayor, as well as a discussion about the size of council and other issues, including term limits. Again, I repeated to the Premier a number of times in our discussion my own willingness to support proper public discussion of all of those issues. What we don't need, and what I just can't support, is change being rammed down our throats without a single second of public consultation. And on top of that, done in the middle of the election period itself. You don't change the rules in the middle of the game. That is not right, and that is not fair. I have always believed that. I have been consistent on that as mayor, not changing the rules in the middle of the game, because it is just not the right way to bring about change. But that's what we have here. Hundreds of people, for example, have put their names forward to run for council. They've raised money, they've been out campaigning, and all of a sudden they're being told, stop, we're not doing it that way anymore. What happens to them? Do they continue on, or do they change where they're running? How does that work? And the answer is we don't know. This affects the way people are represented, the very structure of the government closest to the people, and the notion that we will make significant change to that structure without absolutely any public consultation, with no public consultation or discussion with the people, isn't right, and it isn't necessary. Change of this magnitude should always happen with a degree of consultation that allows the public to be heard. We've actually heard those very words from this government on other issues. In this case, we are talking about a city of 3 million people. They deserve to be heard. They promised to be a government, the Ford government did, for the people. They campaigned on that every day. And so I would say to the Premier and his government, be true to your words. If you are truly a government for the people, then let's put this question to the people. Let them decide. And so I will be moving a motion later this morning at City Council or this afternoon to instruct our city clerks to find a way to have a referendum held, whether it's on the ballot for the October 22nd election or otherwise. And the question can be very simple. Do you support reducing the size of the City Council from 47 to 25? Yes or no? It isn't so much the question that matters as it is the fact there will then be on that question, or on the whole matter of this, a very full public discussion in the fullest and most open possible way. We would live with the result, whatever it is, but at least the people, it will be the people, all of them who choose to vote, who will decide. We are here to serve our residents. They pay the bills. They are the ones that put us in office, and so they should get to have the say. To unilaterally decide in the middle of an election campaign to make a massive change in the way the city is governed isn't right, and it isn't fair. One of the reasons we live in the greatest country in the world is because we collectively make rules and we follow them. And when we change the rules, we do it in a way that listens to the public and follows one form or another of due process. The city I want to lead is one where elected representatives, the mayor in particular, listens to the people. That is the very foundation of our civic system and of our democracy. It's true, the province does have broad powers to do as it chooses when it comes to the City of Toronto. The way the law is set up, the City of Toronto is a creation of the province. But this is a city that is booming. It is a city that is admired around the world. It's a city that is a magnet for talent and jobs and investment. It's a city with an economy that powers the province, and with that admired way of life, and it's admired not just in the rest of this country, but around the world. And all of those wonderful things are because of the people who call Toronto home, the 3 million people who live here. They've never been asked about this. It's never been discussed with them. I hear people this morning talking about conversations and consultations and discussions and debates. There haven't been any of those things on a major decision that affects them and their civic democracy. At the very least, don't they deserve a say in how they're governed? And to me, the answer to that question is simple. And the answer to that question is yes, they do. The people should decide.
Mr. Mayor, is this a political grudge? Why would Premier Ford do this?
Well, I have no idea what his particular motivations are. I had a conversation with him last night that was lengthy and it was animated. It was a constructive discussion back and forth, but I had grave concerns, as I've said, about the way this is being done. But I didn't get into asking him, exactly what all the motivations were behind him doing it. He has his own motivations. I'm sure he'll talk about when he has his own news conference this morning. But I don't. I just don't care to get into that kind of realm of speculation.
Tory, you're a lawyer by training. You're a lawyer by training. Does this seem to you and the people you've talked to be legal? And if it is not legal, would you seek to challenge this?
I will say this. In addition to moving a motion to hold a referendum, I'll also be putting in my motion that we should be asking lawyers inside and outside the city government to take a look at the different laws. But I've conceded the point, and I think we all know this to be true, and I am a lawyer, and the City of Toronto Act is a provincial piece of legislation. It creates the city as an entity. It sets a lot of the rules up about how the city operates, and that's always been the reality under our Constitution. Cities and towns are creations of the provincial government and the provincial legislature. And so we will take a look at those things because I think it's important to do so, but I start from the premise that I do understand, whether I like it or not, that the province has very broad latitude to do things that affect the City of Toronto, especially when there's a majority government at Queen's Park. That's just the reality.
Mayor, the city went through this long 4-year process to figure out how many wards. There was public consultation that was part of it. All the examples, including what Premier Ford is recommending, was on the table. You ended up at 47. It was a council-approved decision. There were legal challenges. Part of the legal challenges, the city clerk cited Supreme Court legislation saying there has to be equal representation. We don't know if the 24 wards has that. Why couldn't there be some kind of a federal legal challenge? And why let the Premier set the term of a referendum when the city has already decided on the way it wants to go?
Well, when you say letting the Premier set the term of referendum, the referendum that I'm talking about would be one that probably would be initiated by us. And so ideally, within the constraints of the law, we would be the ones setting the terms of the referendum. But having said that, you know that I have never supported increasing the size of council. You've heard me say that I've never run into a voter yet, or maybe just one or two, who have said we need more politicians. So I actually voted against increasing the size of the city council. But I think that, and I've said, again, I repeat, I said repeatedly last night and to the Premier that I was willing to see us have a broad public discussion about changing the size of the city council to reduce it and other things that relate to the better governance of the city. But I think going about it this way, regardless of what has gone on in the past, is just not right. Because one thing that's for sure, when they were discussing revised ward boundaries, when we had a provincial election recently, and a host of other things that may have gone on in the last number of weeks, we did not have and have not had a specific discussion on the idea of reducing from 47 to 25 the size of the city council. And that is a discussion I think that should happen with the people, because I think the people should have something to say about that, whatever it may be. I wouldn't presume to know what they'll say, but I sure think they should be asked. And I think the referendum campaign gives people not only a chance to have that debate in a very open way and for everybody to state their position, but it also gives people then a chance to vote, and we will see what the public think about this.
So
I can't imagine what's wrong with that.
So if individual candidates challenge in court, will the city not support them?
David, I think we're being premature in trying to get to that conclusion. What I'm saying is this. I want our lawyers, and I think this is the orderly, proper way to go about it. I can't talk about following good process and then sort of run off and say, well, we should be launching a court challenge tomorrow morning. The first thing I want to do is to get a legal opinion, and as I say, it can be from both or either of inside or outside lawyers, as to exactly what our legal position is. But I do start from the premise of understanding, because I'm a lawyer and because I've read the City of Toronto Act, and I understand the Constitution, as most people I think do, that I know that the province has very broad latitude about what they can do vis-a-vis the City of Toronto. And you can say that's good or bad. The Fathers of Confederation decided that in 1867. There's been actually very little change made to that constitutional reality since that time. And so I think the first thing for us to do is to get somebody to objectively assess our legal position, and then I think once you have that information in hand, you can decide whether it's whether it's a feasible, advisable proposition to take action under any of those headings of advice. So I'm very willing and anxious, and I will put a motion forward to get the legal opinions and get going on that right away, immediately. But I just don't, I won't then go to the next step and say that I know what the actions are going to be coming out of that, simply because I don't know what the opinion's going to say.
Mayor, does the City of Toronto Act not state multiple times, actually, that part of the process is they have to consult? There's an obligation, the city and the province, to consult with each other on major issues of interest, right in the Act.
It's interesting you say that, Cam, because there are those words, those types of words in the City of Toronto Act. There's also another act, and if you ask me right now, do I remember the name of it? It's some act, I think that's called like the Toronto-Ontario Cooperation Act or something, that requires on certain matters. And these are the kinds of things. I haven't had time to sort of review all these statutes overnight, and I'm not the one that should be doing it. We have experts here that can do that, and we set the ball in motion to have them look at it, and I will hopefully formalize that with a motion that Council would approve today to get them to either give us a formal legal opinion or to get one from the outside on precisely those matters. Because while I don't question that the province has very broad authority to deal with the City of Toronto, there are words in different statutes that may allow for us to assert very forcefully the notion that there is some degree of cooperation and consultation that is expected and required here, because I think the public expects that. But if the law backs that up, then that's something obviously we would want to assert in court or somewhere else.
Are there too many councillors? Are there too many councillors? Is it unwieldy? I mean, we've all sat through those council meetings, and it grinds to a halt at times with so many different voices.
I think, I've said before, there's no simple answer to these questions. I've said before that actually City Council gets a fair number of things done relative to other legislative bodies. But on the other hand, there are times and days when it seems to be, manifestly unproductive, and when we're sort of inhibited from moving forward with the agenda that the people want to see us pursue because of, what goes on in that body. And so what I'm saying is that what we need to do, I've said I'm very willing to have the discussion about altering the size of the City Council. I have never heard anybody saying it should be altered up, anybody among the public, aside from the odd person. And so we should look at that, but we should look at it in a kind of a thoughtful, careful way. Most particularly, when I say we should look at it, we should be asking the public about it. And if they'd been asked some other time and voted on this or otherwise, but they haven't been asked. Nobody even heard of this until, basically last night. And so I just think that the public should be asked, and they should be the ones who should give us their advice with respect to how they believe they should be represented. And I'm quite willing to go along with what they have to say on this, because I think that they're very wise when it comes to these things, and they consider things very carefully, and they know that there are no simple answers, but they usually can come to the right answer. I'll come around, Oliver. Sorry. Je ne sais pas, mais je pense que les citoyens ont besoin d'une opportunité qu'est-ce que c'est le mot, de décider cette mesure très importante.
What's the value of having a referendum alongside an election with a fewer number of councillors? Because no matter what the people say at that point, can you put that genie back in the bottle? There's an election this fall with 25 councillors, no matter what the referendum says, that's the future, isn't it?
See, what I'm standing here saying today is that the important part for today that I take great issue with is the process. And I am standing here saying that if the public said, clearly one way or the other, and one thing about a referendum, you will get a result. that says they either are in favor or opposed to something, that you then would know that's how they felt, and I would be more comfortable they'd have been asked and that we'd had a thorough debate on this. And I agree with you, it wouldn't be in place for this election. That's a part of the process that I have some trouble with, which is that we are not only doing this in a way that has been utterly without any consultation with the public whatsoever, but we are also doing it in the middle of an election campaign. It's quite an unprecedented thing. And so, yes, obviously, one of the results of having a referendum coincident with the election would be that it wouldn't be effective for this election, but at the same time, at least you would then know, because there would both be the vote itself and a very long debate that would precede it, that would give you an idea of what the public do think about this, one assumes, after they've listened to all the different points of view that people would have. And so I just think that is a much better way to go about this. I think with these kinds of things, what the public understand is this. They understand there are going to be different points of view, and they understand that there could be one result or the other. But what they want to see us do, whether it's on this decision or any other, is do it the right way. And they certainly think part of doing things the right way is that they should be involved in one way or another in some degree of consultation. If what had happened last night was that I got a phone call saying there was going to be a study panel that was going to go and have public hearings on this matter, I would have said, well, we'll show up, we'll be there. You know, but that wasn't what I was told in the phone call. I had actually read it in the news reports before that, which was in itself quite surprising. But
Did the Premier say to you whether he had this in the plan through the campaign or whether this had just been dreamt up since they came to power?
no, we didn't discuss that specific matter. I mean, I did make a point of saying that this was not something that was discussed in the election campaign. I will just tell you, he first mentioned this to me almost in passing at a meeting we had, and I sort of looked and said, he said it was for this election, and all I said at the time, because I was just not expecting it would be raised, and it wasn't raised in any way that I was either asked for my opinion or that it was seemingly anything that was going to happen right away, and I just said, oh, well, I don't really think that's practical, because I was more focused when I just first heard this on the notion that it was not practical to do it. I mean, like literally, we were right in the middle of the election campaign, and it was, the discussion passed because he didn't sort of pursue the matter, and we were in the middle of discussing a bunch of other things.
When did the Premier say to you that he wanted to cut the number of council seats during
He just mentioned the matter at a private meeting that I had with him in his office. That meeting, whatever, it's the only meeting I've had with him in private since then. And he just,
Because there are people who watch City Hall closely who are going to say, this looks like some kind of a deal. You get more powers, and then you let this election go on.
well, no,
I don't
you
get
know,
down to 20
David, I mean, the proof that that is not the case is the fact that the powers of the mayor are not to be dealt with according to every report that I've seen and everything that I've heard in this particular piece of legislation. So that is just not, it's not the case. And in fact, I will tell you only what my conversation with him was last night when I was, when I had put in front of me by him and by the newspaper reports exactly what their plans were, which is that I took strenuous issue with the process here and with what the way they were going about doing this. Although I said I was quite willing to have a discussion about a whole variety of these issues, including the size of council, term limits, the mayor's powers. I mean, I'm willing to discuss all of it. I discussed parts of that quite openly.
I gotta clarify. 2 weeks ago, the Premier said in a meeting he planned to cut the number of seats
He
during
didn't
the
say that.
election, and you just
No.
let it go?
No, it wasn't put on the basis that he was planning to do it. He said that he's talked about it before, and I actually sort of dismissed it on the basis of saying, well, that's not something that could be done. Like we're in the middle of the election campaign, and the matter dropped at that stage because I didn't have the sense he was pursuing it either.
Couple more questions. When we did this 20 years ago, the council reform came with all sorts of uploading and downloading. So when you talked to Premier Ford yesterday, I mean, is that part of the equation? And do you expect that to be the next sort of shoe to drop?
I will only tell you that in that conversation that I had with him last night, there was no mention of anything else except for the matters that are under discussion here today, which is his intention to move forward with a piece of legislation, I think on Monday, or to announce it today, that had to do with the size of the city council. That was it.
And will you oppose uploading anything that the city currently does? Like
Uploading
uploading?
to the province?
Yeah.
I would welcome them deciding to take on more responsibility for things that they should have more responsibility for, and I've said that many times. I mean, I think their role, for example, in housing should be dramatically increased and should be dramatically increased as a legislative matter as opposed to being at the whim of any given government at any point in time. But there was no mention of any of that, as far as I can tell from what he said last night, and that's the only basis upon which I have to go. There are no other matters that they have on their mind at this point in time, other than specifically to do with the governance question, and there specifically and only to do with the size of council. There was no discussion of the strong mayor thing, for example. I'm relying on reports that said that that was specifically not going to be dealt with in this piece of legislation, and that it would be the subject of consultation, ironically.
Is there any way for you to hold the referendum before the vote, or does it have to be in time with the election this fall?
Quite frankly, I think we'll have to take a look at what the different rules are that govern our ability to have a referendum, and so I can't really answer that question right now, but I just think there should be one, and I think it would be convenient and less expensive and probably sort of sensible to have it on the same day as the election, but I think we're going to have to take a look at what abilities we have, and all I would say is that I would want to seek the cooperation of the public service, the cooperation of, if necessary, of the province, because I would say to the province, well, who could be against having a referendum and letting the people be heard and letting the people decide? And so I would hope everybody would say, well, this is actually a great way to deal with this, and it solves two problems. It gets you the advice of the public, and it gets you the opportunity to have a very full discussion and consultation with the public on it, and so let's have a referendum.
Would you bind it anyway, or just municipal?
Again, that is in part a legal question, as you know, and I mean, if somebody said to me that we still had the opportunity and the only way we could do it is to have a non-binding referendum, but still have one so we could have this very full discussion and have the results of a vote, I'd still take that as being better than where we are today, where we have a major, major decision about the democracy of our city, the level of government closest to the people, that is being dramatically changed without any consultation whatsoever. So I would take almost any kind of a referendum. I mean, I just would think it's a very advisable and a very fair and a very open way in which to have this discussion and have this debate and get the advice of the public. And so these are the kinds of questions, though, that we have to look into as to what tools we have at our disposal and what help we might need to actually make a referendum happen. But I strongly believe it would be a good thing for us to do.
I would like to see a referendum implemented. It's one thing to have it, but you have it during the election, you then have 25 councillors. Would you see the new ward boundaries take place in 2022? Would you be comfortable with the idea of having more electoral upheaval and election down the road?
I think the more sensible way to go about this is to have the referendum and let that be a guide to what we actually do here. The point I'm making today is that we're going ahead to make a change, and I said I'm not unwilling to discuss that change, but what's happening now is we are on a path to have that change made by a government at a different level at Queen's Park without any consultation with the people whatsoever, and I think that's wrong. And so I think at least a referendum campaign, whatever day that was held, would give us the opportunity to get, in no uncertain terms, what the views of the public are, and more importantly, preceding the day of the vote, having a very open and full and informed discussion about a major change. And so I'm not in a position where I can stand here today and say what kind of referendum it would be, how it could be carried out, because there are rules that would have to determine how that happened. I'm just saying we should have one. And we should have one, and that should precede a reduction, because if you allow the reduction to happen and then you have a referendum, it sort of presumes that whatever the outcome is, it doesn't matter. I actually don't come from that place. I come from the place that says the people's views on this really matter, that you certainly should have consulted them before moving forward with any of this kind of thing, and that the best way to consult them now, given that we are where we are, is to have a referendum, and then whatever those results are can be taken into account in terms of what happens legislatively going forward from there.
Did Ford mislead the voters of Toronto?
Well, the matter wasn't discussed, and so...
Yes or no?
Pardon me?
Yes or no? Did he mislead the voters of Toronto?
I would just say to you, the matter wasn't discussed. I mean, it's hard to sort of mislead people when you don't discuss something, but this matter was not discussed to the best of my knowledge. I mean, I haven't seen, we sort of looked last night to see if there'd been some reference to it that we might have missed, and I don't think there was any discussion of this during the course of the election campaign, and so in that sense, it wasn't discussed, and so I'm just saying that it wasn't discussed, and that is something that I think is a fact, that I haven't seen anything to contradict that. We'll take one more question. I beg your pardon?
Doug and Rob Ford once floated the idea of holding a referendum on the issue of cutting the size of council in half when they had their radio show. Did you know that when you proposed
No.
this idea?
No, I actually didn't. And as I say, I would just say to you that the only two times I've ever seen any real reference to this was in the book, which I read, And it was kind of, again, a sort of passing reference to it. And then in this one time 2 weeks ago, there was a passing reference that was sort of dropped so quickly, I didn't even think it was anything that was, you know, going to be taken seriously. It was just a mention of something, and I sort of said, well, I don't think that really, you know, is anything that would even be possible. So that's it. I mean, there has been no, I was not aware they'd said anything on their radio show. I didn't go back and read the transcripts of that. I'm not sure. But anyway, so.
A lot
Yeah.
of people seem angry. A lot of people are angry at this move, and you don't seem angry. You seem kind of like you're not.
You know,
you don't like the process, but let's have a referendum. How do you feel?
I'm angry at the process because I think it is disrespectful of the people, most of all, in that I think the people, when it's a major change being made to their civic democracy, deserve to be consulted in some way, shape, or form. I just think to bring about a change as big as this is not right, so you know me. I mean, I try to be what I think people expect of me, and they tell me this all the time. They expect me to speak up for them and to stand up for them. And I believe I'm doing that this morning in saying that those people that I represent deserve a chance to be heard. I happen to believe the best way to do that, in a way, the simplest way, would be through a referendum and the campaign that would precede it. You know, I'm not happy about being caught short in this way, where I get, well, first of all, I read a newspaper report or two at 9 o'clock at night. It was preceded by rumors floating around in the afternoon, and then I get a phone call telling me something major that is going to affect the fourth biggest city in North America, the biggest city in Canada, and a thriving democracy in the middle of its 4-yearly election campaign is going to have the rules changed in the middle of the game. I think you've seen me before react to circumstances where rules are being changed in the middle of the game in a negative way. But I have my own way. I mean, I try to be a rational person. I think that's the way the public expect me to behave in this job. I'm not happy about this. It is not right. It is not fair. It is not respectful of the people. It is not a proper process to be followed on a major decision about our democracy, and especially in the middle of an election campaign. And so I'm going to go about doing things the way I do them. You know, I will just do that in the coming days, including today at City Council, and people will all conduct themselves consistent with their own personality and their own way of getting things done. I happen to think the way I normally try to behave on these things, where I can sort of indicate my dissatisfaction, but at the same time maintain a responsible, constructive, rational tone, is going to get more progress on this than perhaps behaving in other ways. Got to go.
Is this an attack on the democratic rights of
Thanks very much.